Like Brian said when he was reading the passage, it feels like we've learned so much from Ezra already. A great book about the nation returning to rebuild, and it's taught us so many important lessons about how we want to build our church here. We've seen so far, way back in chapter 1, that first you have to be stirred. And that really is how it starts. If you remember, the king of Persia was stirred in his heart. And if believers aren't stirred, well, the house is never going to get built, is it? So step 1, you have to be stirred. Then we learn you have to be saved. That to build God's house, you need a saved church membership to do so. The house will be built of born-again believers. Then you have to show up. And we talked about how we don't just want to attend church, we want to show up at church. And they're actually two very, very different things. You have to be strong. We talked about the different distractions and enemies and how they will come, maybe in friendship first, maybe they'll use some fear or frustrate us, and all those different things the devil will try to stop the house getting built. So we have to be strong. We have to succeed. We work with that finished goal in mind that we say here every week, that we want to be disciples and we want to make disciples. And that is our goal, to see young men and women in the faith trained up to teach the word to others. You have to be sent. We learned a couple of weeks back that really building the house is cool, but what we want to see is the house beautiful, to have the house beautified. And we saw that how we do that is when we send others out to teach the word. So the most beautiful thing a church can do is to take someone, train them up, and then send them out to minister to other people. And then just last week we looked at how you have to snowball. And what we really want to see, where things really get exciting, is where you see that process of someone saved and brought into the church who's discipled, then they disciple someone else, and you start to see the church snowball. And you remember we talked a lot about multiplication rather than addition. We don't just want to add to the body, we want to be multiplying disciples. All right, so that's a quick recap of where we've got so far. I hope you remembered that all. There will be a test at the end of the sermon, and if you don't pass, you don't get any of Ruth's cake. Okay, she's very strong on that. So that's what we've learnt so far, and that gives us a perfect picture of how the house of God is built. People get stirred, people get saved, people show up ready to serve, people stand strong and don't quit when it gets hard. People are always working towards that single goal of disciples. People are embracing what Ezra is, to study the word, and then to obey it in his life, and then to teach it to others. And then we see that second generation of disciples trained up, ready to do the same and to repeat that. That's what building the house of God looks like. Now, as we move into the last two couple of chapters of Ezra today, we deal with a very, very important issue that is so vital to building God's house. I really hope and pray that I can help explain this to you today, because what we're going to look at is the thing that can completely destroy everything that we're hoping to build here. So imagine, if you will, building this house. So you build your house, you make it look beautiful, you paint it, you decorate it, you get the good furniture in, and then one day you discover that house is infested with termites. And those guys, I don't know if you've ever seen them in real life or on TV, but they eat through stuff like it's going out of fashion. They eat wood, wallpaper, even plastic. And what they will do is they'll destroy that house from inside the house. The problem isn't outside, but it's inside. And you can repaint the house as often as you like. You can get the new furniture, have as many trips to IKEA as you like, which I recommend for the hot dogs, but you can have as many trips to IKEA as you like, get the furniture in, repaint it as often as you like. But if you don't deal with the termites, that house is going to fall apart. And that's what we're going to look at. And that's what we learn really from these last couple of chapters, that the greatest threat to this house being built doesn't come from outside the house. It comes from within. And today we're going to look at just the first 4 verses of the chapter, and we are going to learn that if we want to deal with this significant threat, then we will have to be sober. Now, before we jump in, I just want to talk a bit about what the word sober means. We see it a lot in the Bible, and we'll be looking at a lot of verses to help us as we go. But a brief summary: the word sober means to have a clear head, to be thinking clearly, to be vigilant, and to be watchful, so on the lookout, kind of on guard. It means you're paying attention. To be sober means you are not asleep, but the opposite, you're wide awake. Now, I am a good sleeper. Okay? I think it's one of my gifts, is getting to sleep. The kind of talking about the bedtime routine. So my bedtime routine is when I'm ready to go to bed, I say to Emma, I think I'm going to call it a night. And then within about 30 seconds, I'm asleep. So I'm up the stairs, I lie down like this, and I fall asleep like this. And then my alarm goes off like 7 hours later, and I get up. That's how I sleep. Nothing really stops me. Emma doesn't go to sleep like that. So this is how Emma, she's like, yeah, I think I'm going to call it. And then she kind of scans the area to see what needs a quick tidy. She goes in the kitchen, moves a few things around. I'm sure it's important stuff she's moving around, but she'll do that. She'll kind of pop upstairs. She'll read. She likes to have a read to settle her. And Emma going to bed takes a significant amount of time, but I really sleep. And through the night as well, I don't really notice stuff. Like Emma will tell me something that happened with Luke in the night, and it's quite a drama. And I was like, oh, okay, I have no idea that happened. And that's pretty much been my life, except on 3 occasions. And I guess the pattern there is that I have 3 kids. And the first time we were expecting, I mean, the tension's probably a little higher because it's your first child anyway. But I remember very clearly that night that, again, went to bed. Yep, I'm going to call it. 30 seconds later, I'm asleep. Lie down like this, fall asleep like this. And then Emma gives me a nudge, and she's like, oh, I think I might be going into labour. And it's like, boom! Like your eyes shoot up, the adrenaline's pumping. I'm like multitasking, like it's going out of fashion. On the phone to grandma, arranging babysitting. On the phone to the hospital. Do you remember we had the times of the contractions and stuff? I had my pad, and that is like sober. That's the opposite. Like, I was so alert. I think I could have achieved anything that evening. I was so on guard, looking out for the signs. I had everything prepared. There was nothing that was going to get in the way of me getting Emma to the hospital when she needed to be there. And so when we talk about sober, that's the kind of thing the Bible's getting at. To be really wide awake, to be really on guard, to be watchful, to be looking out for the important and the significant things around. So I'm going to show you a couple of things tonight as we go. There are 2 main ways we must be sober when building God's house. The first is to be sober in our success, and the second is to be sober in our status. All right, let's have a look. So take out Esther chapter 9, verse 1. It says, now when these things were done. And when Ezra says these things, he's talking about everything we've already just recapped at the start of today. He's talking about the fact that up until this point, things have been going really well. So if you remember, the king was stirred and allowed the nation to come back and build. Remember, they had their enemies come along and try and disrupt them. And they were like, no, we're going to do this on our own. And they were working. And last week or a couple of weeks back, we learned he took some of the children up with them and some of the chief men, and things are starting to snowball. It's going really well. Ezra rocks up. He's a ready scribe, a great teacher. He's got that heart prepared to teach others the word and to minister. They have this second wave of people getting ready to be ministered. It's really exciting, isn't it? And when we kind of hear that and think about it, we think, man, that is it. That's the dream right there, and it's happening for Ezra and for the rebuilding here. But it is at that very moment that, as Brian read today, we see a few leaders come to Ezra and they come with some bad news. And what is more, Ezra seems to be completely unaware that this bad stuff is going on. When they deliver this bad news to him, he's completely surprised by it. They say there in Ezra 9 verses 1 and 2, he says, "Now when these things were done, the princes came to me saying, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the people of the lands, doing according to their abominations, even of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. For they have taken of their daughters for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy seed have mingled themselves with the people of those lands. Yea, the hand of the princes and rulers hath been chief in this trespass." So what has happened here? After all this work and all the effort and things are going great and the house of God is being built and it's really on a roll, they come to Ezra and they say, we've got a serious problem here. He says the people have taken the sons and daughters of the Gentile inhabitants and have started engaging in their sinful idolatry and their lifestyle, so that the godly nation are really mixing with the ungodly. They tell Ezra that the holy seed hath mingled themselves with the Canaanites, then goes on to list all these ungodly nations that they've mixed themselves with. So that's what's happened. Now we know that sin is a potential problem, and we know it can destroy a church. However, we often think that it's really in the hard times that pose the greatest risk for us. We think we're most tempted to sin and to lose heart or to lose sight of what we're trying to do. We think that's always during the hardships. And that's probably true. When times are really hard and circumstances make your life really difficult or things aren't going your way, that's probably the time we're going to struggle. We might fall into sin and we make some mistakes. But it's kind of obvious, isn't it? And we all know to watch out for that. And in fact, it's the hard times that we're often, not always, but often it's the hard times that, because we know they're hard, they're what push us closer to God. Like when you're going through a really rough time, that's when your prayer life really kicks off, isn't it? And you're praying day and night, like John says, an hour and a half before bed, because if you don't, you're in serious trouble the next day. And it really drives you closer to God. We really rely upon him then. And that's true, but there's also this other time where sin is a great risk, and that is during peacetime. The time when sin sneaks in the easiest, is actually when things are going good, when things start to go our way, when we have a few spiritual victories, when things are going good, and we just relax a little bit. Spiritually, we take a little nap, we lose a little bit of focus, a little bit of drive, and that is when sin kind of sneaks in, doesn't it, through the back door. Statistically in football, you're most likely to concede a goal in the 10 minutes after you've just scored. So firstly, who has that job of working that out? Because me and Hudson want to sign up. That's the best job ever. But statistically, once you score in football, the players kind of switch off and they think they're on a roll and, we're going to make it, it's great. And it's those few minutes after that, they're most likely going to trip up, make a mistake, lose concentration, and the other team strike back. I want us to have a look at Solomon when he built the house of God for the first time, because it gives such a good picture that really helps us understand what Ezra's talking about here. So we've got a few verses to go through. They're going to be coming up on screen. There's quite a bit of scripture there, but I think it's all going to be really, really helpful to helping us get our head around exactly what it is Ezra wants to teach us. So coming up on the screen here, we have 1 Kings 5, verses 4 to 5. And this is Solomon when he built God's house. It says, "But now the Lord, my God, hath given me rest on every side." Doesn't that sound good? Rest on every side, so that there is neither adversary nor evil occurring. There was no enemy, there's no evil circumstances. And behold, I purpose to build a house unto the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord spake unto David my father, saying, Thy son, whom I will set upon thy throne in thy room, he shall build a house unto my name. So Solomon has the peace and the rest. And after he'd finished building, let's have a look at what God said to him. Let's look at how God warned him. You can see this in 1 Kings 9, 2 and 8. That the Lord appeared to Solomon the second time, as he had appeared to him unto him at Gibeon. And the Lord said unto him, I have heard thy prayer and thy supplication that thou hast made before me. I have hallowed this house which thou hast built, to put my name there forever, and mine eyes and mine heart shall be there perpetually. So God is going to put his name here forever, perpetually, never ending. And if thou wilt walk before me, as David thy father walked, in integrity of heart and in uprightness, to do according to all that I have commanded thee, and will keep my statutes and my judgments, then I will establish the throne of thy kingdom upon Israel forever, as I promised to David thy father, saying, There shall not fail thee a man upon the throne of Israel. So it sounds pretty great, doesn't it? It sounds pretty wonderful. But, we see the but in verse 6, but if ye shall at all turn from following me, ye or your children, and will not keep my commandments and my statutes which I have set up before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then will I cut off Israel out of the land which I have given them, and this house which I have hallowed for my name, will I cast out of my sight, and Israel shall be a proverb and a byword among all people. And at this house which is high, every one that passeth by it shall be astonished, and shall hiss, and shall say, Why hath the Lord done thus unto this land and unto this house? So we see the wonderful godly house that Solomon has built, and God promises to bless it forever. But he says, but, if you turn away, people will be astonished at the ruins of this house. And then what happens to Solomon next? Well, we see this in 1 Kings 10, 14 to 20. Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. Beside that he had of the merchantmen, and of the traffic of the spice merchants, and of the kings of Arabia, and the governors of the country. And King Solomon made 200 targets of beaten gold, 600 shekels of gold went to one target, and he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 pounds of gold went to one shield, and the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory, and overlaid it with the best gold. The throne had 6 steps, and the top of the throne was round behind, and there were stays on either side of the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the stays, and 12 lions stood there on one side and on the other upon the 6 steps. There was not the like made in any kingdom. So really in Solomon we see like the kind of perfect picture of success, and the whole chapter goes on to tell of his glory. But when we take a closer look here, there's a hidden danger lurking in the midst of this peace and in the midst of this success and this restful period. Did anyone spot there in verse 14, the talents of gold that came in was 666. If you look in verse 14, 666 talents of gold. And any time we hear that number, 666, we start to, pricks our attention, doesn't it? His throne had 6 steps, 6 lions on one side, and 6 lions on the other side. And again, we hear that number, and an alarm bell goes off, doesn't it? So this is a real warning in here for Solomon to be sober in his success. that though there is great success and great wealth and everything's golden and wonderful, we see a picture here of the devil, and it rings that alarm bell for us. Just like in chapter 2. Do you remember chapter 2 was the big kind of registry of believers coming back to build the temple? And it sounded great again. And then just in verse 13, we saw Adonikim with his 666 kids. And we think, maybe all isn't as it seems. And then look what happened. What does it say about Solomon in the very next chapter? 1 Kings 11, 1-6. But King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonites, and Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, Ye shall not go into them, neither shall they come into you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. So exactly the thing that God had warned him not to do, Solomon clave unto them in love. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. Surprise, surprise, God was right. For it came to pass, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as did his father. So the Lord did warn him, didn't he? In the midst of that peace, when he had rest on all sides, and the success of seeing this glorious house be built for the Lord, he did warn him. And Solomon got lazy. He got sleepy. He switched off and let his guard down. And the Lord told him that he would cast his house out of his sight, and that everyone who saw Solomon's house would be astonished, that they would see it and walk past it and be amazed and devastated at the ruins that now stood there. And what does it say is Ezra's reaction is exactly the same. He is astonished, amazed and devastated about the risk being posed to God's house here. So what do we learn? We do want to enjoy the successes, and we can rejoice when we see someone get saved, when someone agrees to do the gospel course with us, when someone's really encouraged by a sermon. All those things are wonderful, and we should rejoice in those, and we should take rest from our Heavenly Father when we can. But we must still be careful. We must still remain sober in our success. Remember what the Lord said to Israel in Deuteronomy. Again, it's going to come up on the screen for you. This is Deuteronomy 32, 7-18. It says, Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will show thee, the elders, and they will tell thee. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, and he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel, for the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. He found them in a desert land and in the waste, howling wilderness. Which is where God finds people, isn't it? That's where he found you, by the way, before you got saved. In the desert lands and in the waste, howling wilderness. And he takes them, he led them about, he instructed him, he kept him as the apple of his eye. As an eagle stirreth up her nest, fluttereth over her young, spreadeth abroad her wings, taketh them, beareth them on her wings. This is what he does for people. So the Lord alone did lead him, and there was no strange God with him. He made him ride on the high places of the earth, that he might eat the increase of the fields, and he made him suck honey out of the rock, and oil out of the flinty rock, butter of kine, and milk of sheep, with fat of the lambs, and rams of the breed of Bashan, and goats with the fat kidneys of wheat. And thou didst drink the pure blood of the grape. That's all the best stuff. That's a list of all the different ways God blessed him and gave him the best bits. But Jeshurun, which is another name for Israel, he says, but after all these blessings, and he gave him exactly what he needed, and the best wine, and the best butter, and the milk, and the fat of the lambs, but Jeshurun waxed fat and kicked. Thou art waxen fat, thou art grown thick, thou art covered with fatness. Then he forsook God which made him, and lightly esteemed the rock of his salvation. They provoked him to jealousy with strange gods, with abominations provoked they him to anger. They sacrificed unto devils, not to God, to gods whom they knew not, to new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers feared not. Of the rock that begat thee, thou art unmindful, and hast forgotten God that formed thee. So you see the picture there of kind of the wandering in the wasteland, the absolute blessings where God gave everything he needed. And what was the result? That he was unmindful of God and forgot the God that formed thee. And there is always this danger that we pray and pray for God to bless us and things to go our way and the house to get built. And then when he does that, that's the time when we end up forgetting him. Proverbs 1:32 says, for the turning away of the simple shall slay them, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. So can you see it's the prosperity there, that's the risk, that poses such a risk, that when things are going well and we're prosperous and we're blessed, it destroys the fool because they forget God. Now, maybe you have experienced this personally. You find yourself in trouble spiritually, so you really draw close to God in the word and prayer. And then you get to experience the blessings of that, and things pick up, and you get the joy and the peace and a few victories. And it's at that point where the risk is we commit a sin that was even worse than we were previously. And this really is the nature of the battle. This really captures what the passage is teaching us. That if Satan cannot get you from the outside, sin will try and trip you up from the inside. See, what we see here is Ezra, along with all of his people, free from captivity. God's house at last is fully built and fully functional. All those vessels that came back, all the people that came back, the kind of defense against the enemies, the work, the study, the obeying the word, the teaching it, the bringing the chief men, bringing the young kids along, all of that is all happened. The house of God is beautiful, and that is when the sin creeps in and threatens all of it. And that is how sin can creep into our church and into our lives. And the real warning is that we have to stay sober in our success. And there's loads more to unpack about this, and as we go through the next couple of chapters, we will do that. But for today, I really want us to be aware of these termite sins that creep in and start nibbling away and destroy the house, but from the inside. Now, verse 2 tells us to be sober in our status. So Ezra 9:2, for they have taken of their daughters for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy seed have mingled themselves with the people of those lands. Ye, the hand of the princes and rulers hath been chief in this trespass. So the bad news Ezra is receiving here is not only has it happened, but it's the leaders and the heads of the tribes, the princes and the rulers, that are chief in the trespass. And this word chief means that as the nation was like looking to intermarry and to engage in the sin and the idolatry and the abominations, well, all the rulers and the priests, they were the first in line. They were the ones leading everybody towards it. So you have these princes and the priests, the rulers, the very ones who know the law, the very ones who taught the law, the very ones who were supposed to be training and teaching everybody else how to do it right. They were the ones at the front of the queue, heading down the route of sin and filthiness. And this is another danger where we must remember to be sober and to be wide awake, to have our eyes open. So you can have a think yourself that you may have a certain status among believers. You may have a certain position even in your local church. Maybe you've just been around for a long time. But this can cause us to relax. Like that football team, that scored. This can cause us to relax and to lose focus and to make us a little bit sleepy in our sanctification. And that provides a really dangerous opportunity for sin to creep in. Right, open up your Bible for me at 1 Timothy chapter 3. Because throughout the Bible we see exhortations to be sober. 1 Timothy chapter 3 verse 2. And remember that sober is being awake and vigilant, watchful, really clear-headed. This is the bishop in 1 Timothy 3:2. A bishop must then be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behaviour, given to hospitality and apt to teach. So there you see the great description of what a pastor should be like. And sober's right in there. If you just have a look down a little bit further to verse 11, in chapter 3 verse 11, we hear about the bishop's wife. Even so must their wives be grave, not slanderers, but sober, faithful in all things. So when we think about the chief men that were causing the issue in Ezra's time, this is what the chief church members should look like, the bishop and the bishop's wife. Then jump over to Titus 2 for me. We see the picture of the aged men. So this would be the mature believers in the church. So Titus 2:2. The aged men be sober. There's that word again. Grave, temperate, sound in faith, in charity, in patience. And a couple verses down in Titus 2:6. Young men likewise exhort to be sober-minded. So we see there that the mature believer, the mature men in the church are to be sober and to teach the younger men to be sober too. And Titus 2 verses 3-4 tells us about the aged women. The aged women likewise, that they be in behaviour as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children. So exactly the same, that the aged women in the church are to be sober and to instruct the younger women to be sober too. So can you see that pattern there? That we have the leaders, whether it's by an actual position or whether it's by age, they are supposed to be the very ones that set the example, teaching others to be sober-minded, teaching others in the body to be watchful, to be vigilant, to be wide awake spiritually in their Christian walk. But do we see that today? When we look around churches, do we see that? 'Cause quite often it's the parents and the pastors and the elders first in line to befriend the world and to compromise. And when we think of pastors that you might admire or respect, or even pastors that you love, are disgraced by sin. I mean, how many kids see their parents divided through the ungodly behaviour of one of them, and the parents are divorced? Or the elders in churches we see across the country who have very spiritual Sundays, and then the rest of the week, aren't too fussed about what's going on in their local church. otherwise apathetic, and encourage us to be involved to a point on a Sunday. Church is a nice club to go to, but actually, for your Monday to Saturday, don't take it too seriously. But that is not the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be an atmosphere of soberness. If you have a look for me at Leviticus 19:32, it's in a big list of precepts. We find this chapter, so the rules and the moral guidelines and the ceremonial guidelines. It says 19:32 says, "Thou shalt rise up before the hoary head," which means grey head, "and honour the face of the old man, and fear the God. I am Lord." So the instruction there is to respect and honour the older members of the congregation. And Proverbs 16:31 says, "The hoary head is a crown of glory, if it be found in the way of righteousness." So our aged men and women should wear the grey hair as a crown of glory, because of the gold and righteous example they set for other believers. It's very natural and quite common for the young soldiers to be the ones really hungry to learn and to act. And at times we can see those that have been around for a long time, it's hard to maintain the motivation, and you can start to feel like you're running out of steam. But that is exactly what this passage exhorts us to guard against, that as we get older, especially if we hold a position of ministry or just a position of respect within the local body, that we must be even more careful to remain sober and watchful in our Christian walk, because you can be sure the younger believers coming through are looking to the older believers for example. So, in conclusion, the Bible is absolutely loaded with exhortations to be sober-minded. We've looked at a few, have coming up on the screen. 1 Thessalonians 5, 6 and 8 reminds us, "Therefore let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. For they that sleep in the night, and they that be drunken are drunken in the night. But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet the hope of salvation." That's such a great couple of verses, isn't it? Because it puts the sleepy and the drunken right there, and right next to them, the sober-minded who are ready, getting the armour on, putting the helmet on, and getting ready to go. Titus 2, 11-12. "For the grace of God that bringeth salvation hath appeared to all men, teaching us that, denying godly and worldly lusts, we should live soberly, righteously and godly in this present world." So we say no to the worldly, ungodly lust, and yes to sobriety, to righteousness and to godly living. 1 Peter 5:8, and we could go on, but 1 Peter 5:8, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour." I mean, he's right there looking for us to switch off, isn't he? He's prowling around. He's more subtle than any beast in the field, waiting for us to get sleepy and to relax and to rest. The exhortation is to always be sober. So what Ezra warns us of specifically is that as we build God's house, and especially as we have success in building God's house, we are to remain especially vigilant and sober-minded and watchful, that we do not allow sin to creep in and to ruin what God has built. And you can really hear this in the heart of Paul. If we look at 1 Thessalonians 3-5, remember this church in Thessalonica, he planted that church and preached and got people saved and started making disciples, and that church was a godly church. In the first chapter of 1 Thessalonians, he's just telling them how great they are and how they're so faithful. Their faith has really spread abroad and it's going great and stuff. But his worry was always, 1 Thessalonians 3:5 says, "For this cause, when I could no longer forbear, I sent to know your faith, lest by some means the tempter have tempted you, and our labour be in vain." He was so desperate to find out how they were doing, because he knew, though they'd started to snowball and things were going really great, he was so concerned that that success would lead them to become sleepy, that sin would creep in, and that church would be destroyed. That was what he was so desperate to find word on how they were doing. And that is always really his fear, and should be our fear, that when a church is built, that sin will creep in and destroy it, and all that work and all the effort and all the successes, all the worries, all the teaching, all the studying, all the preaching, all of that ends up being in vain. And we can see here finally Ezra's reaction to the dreadful news that they bring him in Ezra 9 verse 3. He says, "When I heard this thing, I rent my garments, I tore my garment and my mantle," which is robe. He tore his clothes, and literally he plucked the hair off his head and off his beard and sat down astonied. He was amazed and devastated about what had happened. And there is so much more to say about that verse, and there's so much more to come in the next couple of chapters. But today I really want to leave you with this warning, that as we build the house, we too must remain sober and watchful. We must be on guard for those termites, especially when we experience the victories, and especially when we feel encouraged, because the termite sins creep in and can destroy God's house from the inside. And you can be astonished at how much damage those termite sins could do.